This is 1.2, the skeletal muscle gross anatomy. And to start off with terminology, the beginning of any word that begins with the word myo or myo is usually a word that is describing something to do with muscle. And sacro, as the beginning section of the word, is to do with flesh. Now here we have a skeletal muscle organ. And this is actually a skeletal muscle, the whole skeletal muscle fiber. And this skeletal muscle fiber will connect with the muscle here to the bone via this tendon. And this tendon is made of a long, dense, fibrous connective tissue made of collagen fibers. And the ends of all connective tissues come together with the muscles to the bone at these tendons. Now, this is the actual, this is a cross section of the actual skeletal muscle fiber. And on the outside, we have this epimysium kind of thick layer around the outside. And this epimysium is the connective tissue that covers the entire muscle. This covers the entire muscle. Within this, you have this sort of perimysium kind of like layer that separates the fascicles of the endomysium. And these this is known as the perimysium, which is the connective tissue dividing the muscles into the bundles of fascicles. These fascicles here, this section extended out through the whole skeletal muscle, these are the fascicles. Blood vessels and nerves are contained inside the perimysium. So in this diagram here, it's a cross section where the blood capillaries flow past the muscle fibers in the perimysium. This is the perimysium here, where the blood capillaries go through. Back to this is so the one fascicle. This is one fascicle. The fascicles are the whole group as a collective. And this endomysium is the connective tissue that covers each muscle fiber and ties the fibers together. This contains capillaries and nerve tissue. So these tiny bits here are the endomysium. These are this is the cellular structure. As you can see on this pit, you can see the nuclei right there. You can see them. This is the actual single cellular skeletal muscle fiber cell. As you go all the way back, this is the whole skeletal muscle with these fascicles, these bundles of fascicles in the perimysium layer. And these endomysium are within this perimysium layer. As we go here, these are the cross sections, and this is the cross section of the skeletal muscle, and that's this section here. That's this section here with the endomysium outer layer, the endomysium within these fascicles, these muscle fascicles inside, with the blood vessels flowing through the perimysium, these muscle fibers inside, the nerve cells also inside there. That's how small of a scale that is. The nerve cells are going through with the blood vessels. Now, inside each one of these fiber bundles, so this diagram here is just one of these fascicles, these muscle fibers. This is the whole thing itself. So these are the muscle fibers right here. These are the muscle fibers. Endomysium right here. Endomysium, the connective tissue covering each and every single one of these muscle fibers. These are singular muscle fibers, and tying them together, they contain the capillaries and the nerve tissue in here. The capillaries and the nerve tissue. So we're going to go zoom in on just one of these muscle fibers. So this one right here is just this singular thing right here. In here, this is what you contain. You have the microfibril, the capillaries, the axons of the neurons. This axon is this section here. This axon, this section here. As it comes through, this is where the impulse travels down. Axon right here. The mitochondrion, which is a singular mitochondria, the sarcoplasm, the endomysium, and the microfibril. So this microfibril is the long contractile threads in the striated muscle cells. The long contractile threads inside these muscle cells. And so as we follow it through, the microfilaments are within these. So within each one of these microfibril is a long elongated, as you stretch it out. If you were to take a cross section of it and look at the side of that cross section, the myofibril is striated. The myofibril is striated. So these stripes are the sarcomeres. These sarcomere sections are the parts with the bands, the Z lines, the striped lines. This is where the sliding filament theory actually takes place of contractions. This is where the contractions happen inside these microfibril. And the microfibril are the long contractile threads. So they are long and they contract together. This is the stripes that you see on the muscle cells. This is the striations. This is what this actually means. And these, where it takes place is, and the next part of this is where the skeletal muscle is within the sarcomeres, the composition of the repeating structure of the myosin and actin fibers. So these Z lines and these bands are formation of the myosin and actin fibers that are in a repeating structure. These repeating contractile structure allows them to contract with each other. These thin filaments can slide in and out each other, surrounded by the thicker filaments. The thin filaments are connected to the bands. So the Z lines are down the sides, and these filaments slide in and out each other. So there's longer ones, there's the thicker ones, and the shorter ones, which are the thinner ones, slide in and out each other so they can connect with each other and contract. Another important thing to note is that tendons don't always have to be connecting a muscle to a bone. There is something known as an aponeurosis, which is a broad sheet of collagen fibers that connects muscles to each other. This is similar to a tendon, but they do not connect to a bone. So, for example, in your palm, there is a broad sheet of these collagen fibers that connect the muscles to each other in your hand. This is another way that a tendon can be presented in the body, and it's important to note when looking at the anatomy throughout the body. So these diagrams show the level of muscle organization in the actual muscle fiber itself. So you have the skeletal muscle surrounded by the epimysium containing the muscle fascicles. We go into the muscle fascicle itself, surrounded by the perimysium containing the muscle fibers, so the capillaries and the nerve cells right here, the vessels, and within one of these muscle fibers, one of the individual muscle fibers, surrounded by the endomysium containing the microfibrils. Now this is a microfibril right here, surrounded by the sarcoplasmic reticulum. This part here come down the sarcoplasmic reticulum. This is the single cellular structure. These are the fibers, these are the fibrils, the long there's the sarcomeres with the Z lines. So that was a Z line there, where the cells connect to each other. This structure forms a zigzag Z line at the end of each one of these cells. These thicker fibers in the middle and the thinner ones on the side. So within one of these sarcomeres, you have the separate bands with the thicker filaments in the center, different bands, Z lines at either end, and thinner filaments connected directly to the Z lines and the middle line here. This is where the actual contraction takes place, as these thicker lines pull the thinner filaments towards the center of the lines. This is going into more depth later on. This is a more detailed diagram of the microfibril structure. So you can see the single cellular section of the individual microfibril. Thicker filaments in the center, the thinner filaments on the side, the Z lines. This shows the actual section of the skeletal muscular fiber. This is another cross section with inside this. This is an extended part. This is the sarcoplasmic reticulum around the side, the T tubules coming all the way down, and the mitochondrions right here. Cross sectioned at this point, the full ones right here. So the myofilaments and strands, they are strands of protein called actin and myosin. So the actin and myosin are within the sarcomeres, right in this section here. Another important thing to note about the blood vessels themselves, they're an extensive network of the blood vessels in the skeletal system themselves. This is because there is a high need of oxygen transfer and nutrients needed to the skeletal muscles. This is known as them having high metabolic needs. This cross section shows that the blood capillaries go through the section in the center called the endomysium. So as the blood capillaries pass through the endomysium, they can easily transfer the blood and nutrients and everything else contained in the blood, traveling through the capillaries to the muscle fibers themselves. The final section of the skeletal muscle gross anatomy is the neuron and the neuromuscular junction sites. So to start off with, the direction of the impulse travels is from this head of the neuron cell down the axon through the myelin sheath, the insulator, speeding up the rate of electrical impulse travel to the axon terminal branches across the synapse. The neurotransmitter transmits the chemical, so the electrical impulse can travel over the synapse gap onto the next neuron cell to the dendrite through the cell and repeats this progress. The direction of travel of the impulse also always goes down this way. So this is another diagram showing the nerve cell connecting to an actual muscle fiber itself. So this section here, the dendrites on these little tail parts collect the signal from another nerve cell. The signal travels down the axon through the myelin sheath, increasing the speed of the electrical impulse to the axon terminal branches. As it reaches the end, reaches the presynaptic membrane. As it gets to the presynaptic membrane, the neurotransmitter is released across the synapse, and the electrical impulse can go across. And once enough of the neurotransmitter is released across the receptor sites, the electrical impulse can travel across to formulate the contraction along both sides of the fiber as it is striated. The neuromuscular rates to the nervous system and the muscular system are through the sensory and the motor neurons. They are mostly under voluntary control and must be stimulated by the CNS, or also known as the central nervous system. The axons push through the epimysium and the perimysium and enter the endomysium to control the individual muscle fibers. The motor unit is the neuron and the fibers it controls. The motor unit can travel many muscle